Okay. Hi, everyone. You ready? Yeah, you can't. I'm talking into a microphone and not hearing it come out of speakers. So where it's a little disconcerting. So housekeeping first. This is a presentation via Zoom. So there's transcripts if you hit the transcript button. I do have a couple of images in the slide deck, but they're just for addition. They're decorative, so I'm not going to explain them visually, but also I work in accessibility. So I like to show this quick little trick that we have on Google Slides. I know not everyone likes Google products, but you can turn captioning on and over here in this toggle. And so I do text position at the top because they're open captions when you have them on because you can't, because they're burned on. And then I try to have them large. So if I toggle this on, you can see now that there are captions at the top of the screen. It's kind of a neat little feature when you're at smaller camps that don't have cart captioning and that kind of thing. But again, this is now open captions, so they're burned at the top. And the reason I have them up there is because on YouTube, where you'll see this later, the captions are at the bottom, and sometimes they'll cover each other up depending on the settings. Fun fact, Stanford Web Camp was my very first Drupal event um, before I even knew what Drupal was. This is the reason I became part of the community. I came here and I met some people and went, wow, these are my people. And I stayed. I met one of my best friends, Mark, here, I think like 11 years ago. But today we're talking about curiosity, not, how I got into Drupal. We're not talking about productivity hacks. We're not talking about becoming 10 times developer. We're not speed running your career. Curiosity, because in open source, curiosity is one of the most valuable things I think I have, and I want to help others explore their curiosity, because tools change, platforms change, best practices change, entire naming conventions change. While we're still learning the old ones. But curiosity keeps us working. So today I want to talk about how to keep learning in open source without burning out, without feeling like we're behind, without believing everyone else magically knows what they're doing, because I feel that imposter syndrome, because spoiler alert, they do not. Here's a link to my presentation. I don't have any resource links at the bottom, but if you want to follow along because of accessibility, I have that. Um, my name is Amy Jean Heinlein. I work as the Certification Community Architect for the Linux Foundation's Global Skills Team. That's a mouthful. I just got reorged, so still practicing how to say that in a little shorter way. But what that means is I spend a lot of time helping subject matter experts turn real world knowledge into exams and learning content. The Linux Foundation is an umbrella for many open source projects, including the CNCF, which is the Cloud Native Computing Foundation, which is a home to Kubernetes. I come from the Drupal world, of course, where we learned like all kinds of different skills, right? Technical skills, community skills, conflict resolution skills, and more often than not, patience, especially with our learning paths. I'm involved in accessibility work, community events, a lot of places where people are continuing to grow. So this talk comes from really seeing how people learn, where they get stuck, and how often brilliant people underestimate themselves. 3 places I'm going to go today is first, we're learning in a changing open source ecosystem. AI, that's a prime example of how things move very fast. First, I'm going to talk about certifications as checkpoints and not finish lines. And then third, I want to talk about using the community as momentum for our learning paths. Basically, how to keep going when things change, how to measure progress without letting it define you. We've all failed exams, that's not a definition of our true selves. And why none of this, why none of us are meant to do it alone. I'm a nurse by trade. My path into this Drupal world was accidental and not strategic at all, okay? I ended up building a Drupal site, getting curious, went to an event, this one, I told you that. I met people, I asked questions, I kept showing up. And somehow that turned into a career, which is important because many people think everyone else follows this clean path, computer science degree, internship, junior role, fancy title. But sometimes the real path is, what happens if I click this? Oh no. And then I guess I now know Drupal. So if your path is messy, it's sometimes delayed, sometimes it's unusual, sometimes it's sideways. Welcome. You're in good company. We all come from different places. But open source keeps moving. That's one of its strengths, right? All of us collaborating and working together. It evolves super fast. Communities experiment, ideas spread, better approaches replace old ones. It's can be exciting. It can also be kind of rude, right? Because the moment you finally think you understand something, the ecosystem says, great, we're going to do it different now. And that can really make people feel like they're falling behind, but really they're participating in an evolving system. So early in your career, you kind of think your job is the tasks in the job description, right? Then reality arrives. It's much like the TARDIS. It's bigger on the inside, you know. The role is bigger than the title. You're expected to communicate clearly, you document things, you review work, you learn tools, you collaborate with real humans. Well, now sometimes we don't collaborate with real humans. We solve really vague problems. There's uncertainty that we have to navigate. And later in your career, you're expected to be the mentor, the guide, the role model. You display healthy learning habits and somehow know all the things. That role really grows beyond the title. But that doesn't mean we're behind. It means that the world is bigger than that label that was given to us. Um, I just learned that best moving target isn't an expression I should use anymore because of like trigger isn't a thing I'm supposed to use anymore either, but best practice is a moving target. Early career folks are learning rules while the rules are changing. Senior folks are unlearning habits that used to work beautifully 10 years ago, but not so much today. The tools that you helped create can get replaced faster than expected. You could have a release candidate and then the model changes the next day. So once you sort of figure out the one workflow, someone says, remember this, Drupal 7 to Drupal 8, we're migrating, right? Those are words that aren't always comfortable to hear. It's that classic open source sentence. We talk about curiosity if it's like cute and effortless, right? And it's not. It can sometimes be vulnerable, especially from people from marginalized communities or maybe people that don't come from tech originally, because it means asking questions. It's admitting that you don't know something. It's trying something publicly, being new again. And being new gets harder the more experienced you become because beginners are expected not to know anything, but experts think they're supposed to know everything, and that's kind of a trap. So for me, curiosity did not look glamorous. It looked like going to events where I didn't know anybody, asking questions I worried that were very obvious, right? Volunteering before I felt ready. Bad Camp was a good example. I had this boss that was like, boom, you're going to start organizing events. It's like, oh, okay. Trying things really badly, right? Learning from people smarter than me. We're supposed to fill the room with people that are smarter than us, which sometimes makes us feel kind of dumb, right? Doing community work has taught me more than tutorials ever did. Tutorials are great, but being with the people that help you learn and being able to ask questions at the same times. But often that curiosity for me looked less like brilliance and more like this like awkward persistence, like just being the person that was always showing up. So our first checkpoint in this is, how do we learn in a system that never sits still? First, we stop treating change as proof that we're failing. I entered Drupal in the Drupal 7, Drupal 8 cusp. That OOP thing, the composer thing, it was like kind of hard, right? I started in Drupal 6, Drupal 7 was easy. That Drupal 8 was quite a jump. Um, but change is normal here, right? We found a new way of doing things. People were confused. Confusion is normal when we learn. Version updates are definitely normal in our world. That doesn't mean that we're broken. It just means that we're moved because things always move. So one of the biggest threats to learning is being quiet. That's that silence that we feel. Over time, pressure teaches us to stop asking questions, especially as an under a marginalized community in the tech world. Some of us have more privilege than others to ask questions and not feel targeted, I guess. Um, we don't want to be judged, so we stay quiet. But really, that silence looks like confidence from the outside, but it feels like isolation on the inside. People think that we know more than we do because they see this confident person not asking questions. Some of the most capable people I know still think they ask too many questions. So my advice is to ask anyway. And with that stack never staying still, burnout can happen when learning feels mandatory all the time. How many of you have worked for an agency where your billable hours are like 38, right? 38 hours of billable. When do you have that chance to learn? I've seen more agencies and organizations shift to, that 30-hour week where you have that 10 hours of like meetings and community time and learning. But burnout can happen when that learning feels mandatory. Every tool feels required. You feel like you have to know Composer in and out. You feel like you have to know your local environment stack. What are we using today? Are we using Doxel? Are we using DDEV? Where's Lando? All of those sorts of things. Every post that people make in Slack or LinkedIn, it feels like everyone else is just crushing it, right? Like they're doing so much and they're learning and all these things, and we can't help but compare ourselves. We compare our real selves to their polished announcements, right? Their curated learning curve. And that's a terrible trade. It's their highlight reel, right? So my advice is to focus on your progress, share something small. Don't fake deadlines. Is there really a deadline? I'm a hospice nurse. Unless your website or whatever application you're working on is like something medical related, there is no life and death on the web, you know. So focus on your progress, no one gets a trophy for like speed learning Kubernetes, right? You know? So learning is not linear. It loops, right? We revisit fundamentals later and suddenly we understand them better, having that exposure to them, putting it on pause and coming back. There's detours, there unexpected roles that we take on, like your QA, but all of a sudden you have to learn how to like do accessibility. Now it's tied in, but sometimes accessibility is a whole different role, but you switch to a smaller agency and now accessibility is part of that QA role. These unexpected roles teach us that our original plan isn't the one that is going to be I don't know how to put that. It isn't going to be the one that we ultimately land on. It restarts. We have layoffs. We have caregiving, whether it be, we're taking care of young ones or old ones or, loved ones or volunteer work. So we have life changes, we have new priorities. And many people think that restarting sort of erases progress, but you carry what you learned with you, even if that title changes, even if the path changes, even if the plan catches fire, right? So a quick reflection moment, think about where you are right now. Are you starting over? I just recently got laid off. Well, not recently, but I worked for Red Hat for a long time curating opensource.com. And I got laid off and a person from the Linux Foundation snatched me up and said, now you're going to help write certifications and exams. I'm like, what? Huh? But in this industry, in this tech job whatever ecosystem that's happening right now, sometimes you have to snatch up that job. So you have to relearn things, you know? So are you starting over? Are you learning something new? Are you trying to grow quietly? You know, you have a job you don't like, so you're learning in the background of that role, that new job that you want to take on. Um, this room is full of people who are at those different checkpoints. And that's not a weakness, that's community, right? We can't all be smart all-in-one things. We use each other to like bounce, like I'm not a developer, so I don't write the exams, full disclosure. I get other people to write the exams for me. That's my strength. I heard and they write, you know? So let's talk about certifications. Yes, I work in certifications. That's the elephant in the room. So this would be a suspicious admission if I didn't say that. But I want to reframe what certifications are. When I first started in Drupal, I took the Drupal 7 site building exam and I did not pass. And I felt like a failure and it was not good. It did not feel good, right? And I wish I would have known what I know now about certifications. But so certifications are checkpoints. They're not finish lines. They're not identity. They do not define you. You can be a site builder and fail the Drupal 7 site builder exam 3 times. I know. Um, they're not proof that we're worthy. They're not proof that we're unworthy. It's a checkpoint. So a quick like sneak behind the curtain, because I think this part matters a lot. Certifications don't come from one person sitting in a room deciding what feels important. It comes from hiring managers. It comes from technical PMs. Well, let's back up a little bit. Certifications are built by SMEs, subject matter experts. They're people who are actively doing that work, investigating that role. We start by defining what we call the minimally qualified candidate, like associate level exams or engineer level exams. We define that in a group of people that what are the minimal skills to enter this role? What are the minimum skills? So basically, what does someone need to know to be competent in that role? Not perfect, not senior, just capable. Then we build a blueprint or a straw man from that, you know, much like a house, you know, the framework and different things. What skills matter? Uh, what should someone be able to do? And then SMEs, those subject matter experts, will write and review the questions. And if you have a good exam, you have different people, different levels in that role. You might have a beginner that can review a question and be like, what the heck? I've been working in this field 6 months and I've never come across that instance, right? Ideally from different companies, you know, maybe a project manager, maybe a developer, depending on what kind of certification it is. Which means that content is shaped by real practitioners. It's not just theory. So when you take a certification, you're not being measured against some abstract ideal. You're being measured against a community-informed expectation of what ready looks like. So that's sort of the certification process. There's a lot more to it, but that's just sort of simplifying it because full disclosure, I've never given this talk before, so I don't know how long it's going to be. So I have to be brief sometimes. So at their best, certifications really do 3 things. They show where you are now. They reveal gaps that the industry might think that you have. And they also build confidence through structure. And I think that's really useful because learners don't need judgment. We're not, you know, I don't know. Judgment is the opposite of what feels good, right? We need direction. We need to know what to focus on next. And they need evidence that progress is happening. That's why certifications have different levels. You have the associate, the technical or the engineer sort of thing. And certification is not forever. It reflects one moment in time, right? That matters in open source because moments in time expire quickly. Passing something does not mean you need to stop learning. Not passing does not mean you have to stop trying either. It just gives us feedback. It's that checkpoint. Think of it more like a verdict or maybe like a GPS. Like, I had to pick up my friend today I didn't have to, I was nice and he called me wonderful. But I picked up a friend and I was using the GPS. Um, sometimes it says proceed. Great, you're doing a good job. You're following all the streets, but sometimes it says, redirect because you missed a turn, right? Um, both are useful. The third checkpoint is community as momentum. And I think this is especially true in the Drupal community. Like I said, I've worked across all different kinds of communities, but the Drupal community is really unique um, because we're all in it together, and we feel that, especially if you do like contribution work, right? Because motivation kind of comes and goes, your energy comes and goes, confidence definitely comes and goes, and that community helps us carry us all together or separately when those things kind of dip, right? So where does learning happen? How many of you had like a really great conversation at a meetup? Like you go to the presentation and then afterward you go to the pub or to the coffee shop and you have a really great conversation. Um, Learning happens in the issue queues too. When I first started in Drupal, I relied on READMEs and documentation to understand the contributed modules, right? And as a non-developer, if there was any sort of step missing, I was lost. So I would open an issue for a README saying, hey, this doesn't make sense, right? And so when you create an issue or you comment on an issue, you're automatically subscribed to it. So you have all this feedback that comes back from these developers that are helping you solve this issue and improving documentation, which is another place where learning happens is that documentation, especially as a beginner, following that documentation, following those tutorials and how-tos. As a beginner, you're that perfect person to help the next person. Code review, we all learn with code review. I hope that doesn't change in the age of AI. I hope that we're still being very intent, having intent when we code review. And I hope that people don't dump a lot of code that doesn't matter and it's hard to code review. Mentoring, the best way to learn something is to teach others, right? Mentoring can take the form of sitting in the first time contributor workshop. It can take the form of, presenting at a camp. It can be peer mentoring within your agency as well. Watching someone else solve a problem, that peer mentoring on the other side, being the person, the mentee. Um, uh, Open source learning is rarely just course shaped. It can help you develop the skills, but really, being with people, it's learning in open source is more relationship based, I feel. But sometimes learning looks a little different. It could be fixing a typo in docs. You're learning how to do a merge request. Maybe if this was 10 years ago, you've learned how to do a patch and you're a project manager and you're like, I don't even know the command line, but you want to fix a typo, so that's learning. Asking a question after a session. Testing a release candidate, especially nowadays, testing Drupal CMS, making sure that you know how to use it, uh, uh, looking at what was it called? Umame when it first came out, reviewing and looking at that, entering your own recipe. Um, Helping a newcomer install something. Randy Fay, do people know who Randy Fay is with DDev? He once told me, he said, Amy June, thank you because you would ask questions because you didn't know how to do it. And then I realized I didn't have the answer and I had to learn. And I was like, you're learning from me? Wow. So helping a new person, really educates you as well. Improving accessibility, saying, I think this could be better, and then helping, because not every contribution has to be code. We've learned that in the last 12 years in Drupal, haven't we? Drupal folks know this just because like we've shifted like mentoring, like, I was told you I was voluntold to help run Bad Camp, and I'd never done that before, so that's a contribution to Drupal. It's learning because you're learning what sessions make sense to people. And you're also uh, building community, which helps learning. Some of the first places people meet Drupal is at our meetups and camps, right? Um, because a healthy project needs all kinds of expertise. Okay. Um, we tend to underestimate the small actions because they look small in that moment. One question does not feel like it's life-changing. One doc does not feel like it's career defining. One conversation at camp doesn't seem like a turning point, but open source is full of all of those stories that started exactly that way. You know, it's very interesting to ask people how they started out in open source or Drupal. But most momentum is built sort of quietly. You know, it's rarely dramatic. It's usually consistent. Some days you're not building that 5-year plan. Some days the win is smaller. You finally understand that concept that really confused you, 2 years ago. Um, Solving that one annoying problem that's been bothering you for 3 years, that's a definite win, right? That's something that you don't have to think about every time you like try to set up your local environment and you can't figure out why you're always pushing to production and not keeping it on your machine. You know, it's those little things or big things, depending on what website you're working on. Um, Not every day needs to be transformative, right? Some days we just need to move. We just need to keep that momentum. I think of it as like a older Volkswagen Bug that has like that 36 horse engine. You have to have that momentum to get up the hill. And if you stop, well, good luck. You're going to have to go down and get that momentum again. So it's that small things every day. But rest is allowed. I know that in the tech culture, we don't always say that kindly. So I'll say it directly. It's okay to step back. It's okay to be tired. It's really hard to hold up this microphone for 45 minutes. Like my hand is falling asleep. Okay. So it's okay to be tired. And it's okay to return later with more energy and perhaps a better attitude, right? Because when we get frustrated, it's just like the world is out to get us. We don't want to help, all those things. Sometimes the most strategic move is not pushing harder. Um, Sometimes it's making a cup of tea and having some coffee and maybe reading a book and then going back to it after lunch, right? Maybe we couldn't understand because we needed a sandwich. So rest is allowed. And growth changes over time. I have a lot of these words up here that I'm not going to talk about. I have, for people who are looking at the slides, early career versus senior, because they are definitely different steps. But also as a senior and you're learning new things, part of that early career advice is applied to you too. Because growth early on in our careers, it's really fast. It feels really fast. We're trying everything. We're saying yes a lot. Later growth might look like boundary setting. We have better judgment. We help others shine. We don't have to do it ourselves. Like me, I don't do it myself. I have other people do it, and that helps them learn too, right? Give them some direction. Knowing what not to chase, right? That's a hard thing too, learning that you don't always have to follow the bright and shiny. Choosing depth over noise, that signal versus noise, making sure that you filter out all those things that other people keep chattering about, but maybe that isn't important for your growth. There's no rule that says growth must always be louder. So imagine if learning was less performative, less pressure to always be current, less fear of maybe looking new, less obsession with doing everything immediately, more room for curiosity, more room for questions, more room for people to learn at a more human speed in the time of AI, right? But we would keep more people in tech if learning felt kinder. You don't need to a dramatic reinvention after this talk, okay? But just sort of looking at like what you have going on and where you want to be. You don't have to learn 17 things between now and Monday. You pick one thing. You pick one course. You pick one question. You pick one meetup. You have one conversation. One step is enough. Being more determinate on your path. The next thing you learn may not stop with you. Oh, I have lots of time, darn it. Shoot. It may be the answer that someone else gives you. It could be that doc that you improve. It could be the person that you encourage. It could be the session you present. I know that I learn more about something when I present on it because I'm afraid of Q&A at the end, right? That newcomer that you welcome and talk about what you do and you give them the insights of your role. The curiosity has these ripple effects, right? Sometimes we grow for ourselves and sometimes we grow so others can too. Most important is we're not behind. We're exactly where we need to be, right? We just might be on a different timeline than other folks. We may be recovering from something. Recovering from a layoff is a big deal, right? So give yourself some grace. It could be that you're rebuilding confidence because you just got laid off or your position changed or AI is doing the job that you once did. So you could be learning slower and deeper than before, being more strategic about your learning. It could be that simply that living a real life while trying your best. That's not behind. That curiosity is still in there, even quietly, right? So it's a matter of keeping going. So I have this little graph, and this is my last slide. I have plenty of time if we want to talk about other things. So learning is not linear. We've all seen that Drupal chart, the learning curve, where we go like this and people are falling off and, it's scary, right? Curiosity is a practice. It really does take initiative to be curious. You have to think about what you want to learn. You have to be strategic. Well, not strategic necessarily. You can be, your circumstances can just change and you're in a conversation that you never thought you'd be interested in. And now you have something to learn. Certifications are that checkpoint, right? They don't define who we are, but they help us establish this baseline for us. It reveals those gaps like I talked about. And I think this is the most important one, is that community creates momentum. We don't learn in a vacuum. It takes a group of people to bounce ideas off of each other, right? That collaboration. And the more diverse your room is, the more we're going to learn from different perspectives. The way I use Drupal is definitely different than the way y'all use Drupal, right? But I have a valid case point and, I have things that I want to share. The way I use a CRM is different than the way Steve might use a CRM, but, helping maintainers build a project the way you want to do it, that helps with that learning curve. Those small steps, like I said, we see that others highlights reels and we compare ourselves to that, but all of those small steps equal a highlight eventually, right? Comparison is never good. And if Drupal has taught me and you or us collectively anything, sometimes it takes the rebuild takes a minute, right? But it still works. And I think that's all I have for content. That's me. I'm Volkswagen Chick across Drupal.org and all this stuff. So are there any questions? Yes, Steve.
You said that the camp.
Stanford camp, yeah.
Coming back basketball game.
Oh, I did not say Stanford was the best Drupal camp. I said it was my first one. So that's a trick question. Every year. Okay, thank you. You good? Okay.
Are you guys using AI to help write? Yeah.
Question is, are we using AI to help write certification exams? So curious, right now I'm working on a couple of exams and they're all AI exams. I'm writing an MCP exam. I'm writing a PyTorch exam. I use a platform for the associate level exams that it gives the authors of the items an editor, and you can utilize AI to develop your questions, but I always have the script that when I'm onboarding the item writers that they do have to look at it, because when we write an item, we have to have it be defensible. So we have to make sure that there's one correct answer and three wrong yet plausible. And we have to make sure that like there's certain determinants for the distractors that make them not stand out against the correct answer, because as there's professional test takers that can look and see, not even without reading a question, what the correct answers are. So sometimes AI does not get that part right. And AI does not get like the references correct. And so it really does, we do let the authors utilize AI, but we have a strict review process that is not AI. And because of exam defensibility, we tell the writers that they can't review the item in their AI tool because we don't want our information leaked, right? Because then people can study for the exam and stuff like that. But we do, but okay, so when I first started 3 years ago, we would build like the straw man blueprint from scratch. But now I utilize AI because the SMEs sometimes have a problem with that blank page. So it's really easy to tear apart content that you don't like sometimes rather than building it on your own. So we'll do a blueprint with AI, and then the SMEs will go in and be like, wow, no, no, no. And then they'll work on that. And then we still do another review with a different set of SMEs to make sure we didn't miss anything. But yeah, AI does affect our work a little bit, but we use it more of the tool for not having the blank page. Yeah, good question, Anne. Yes.
Because, so you have experience in multiple open source communities. I have experience in distributed communities, but is there a commonality there between these communities? Like, how do you get started with other communities? What have you found in other communities compared to this community that exists in?
So the question is asking, because I come from multiple open source communities, and most of people in the room just come from the Drupal community. What is the similarities of, and what are the differences between communities? So the Drupal community, I'm a little biased, I feel that they're more welcoming to outsiders, we welcome and we do that little Pac-Man thing, even like the meetup level, right? We're always like, hey, come and join us. And I'm not saying that other communities are more closed, but they're not as inviting, right? We try to really welcome that novice, right? And we're always trying to, community. Some of the open source communities have a stronger sense of maintainership, which can seem more closed. They have like governing boards, and we have maintainers in Drupal, but our project is huge, right? Our code is huge. Where if you have a smaller community, that governing factor, those maintainers are a little bit more closed and more things happen, not necessarily behind closed doors, but with fewer people involved. And I feel that's a big difference. I don't feel like it's as like when I go to KubeCon, there's not a contribution day, right? That sort of thing. So a lot of it happens like within a smaller group of people. And we have that in Drupal sometimes too, all of a sudden we're like, whoa, we didn't even know that was happening. But for the most part, we're very open. We have the issue queue and that sort of kind of thing. Oh, nope. There are no online questions. Thanks. Okay, great. I'm gonna hit stop. Thank you.